us to go through?
Yeah. Okay, yeah, whenever you're ready.
Okay, this is my documentary and my picture for my documentary. It's called No Brakes, No Gears, No Fear. The Reading Racers story by me, Owen Saunders. So No Brakes, No Gears, No Fear, that's the title. It's sort of a saying, a motto if you like, among Speedway. And it also hints to, for some of the viewers that haven't got maybe a knowledge of the sport, it also hints to some of the main factors. So Speedway bikes having no brakes, no gears, and I think to do it you have to be pretty fearless. So moving on to the synopsis of my documentary, it all focuses around one question: is Speedway a dying sport? And this is a question that in Speedway, especially in British Speedway, has been going around a lot, from say the golden years in say the 1950s to the 1970s, when Speedway was massive in England, bigger than football, and now having massive decline with teams having to fold because they can't afford to keep running. So I discover this and investigate this in lots of different ways, and in my first section it just covers a brief history of the sport. So going right from say the first sign of Speedway ever in say 1903, moving right up to current day Speedway in the Grand Prix, the highest tier of World Speedway. Section 2 then looks at the story of Reading Racers. Now Reading Racers I felt was a good example to run parallel with if Speedway is a dying sport or not, because it's a sort of classic example of having a side in its golden years having the world champion ride for them, to declining. When they were the Reading Speedway Racers, having the world champion ride for them, winning a lot, and then having to decline in the early 2000s, and when they had to sell their club and rename it to the Reading Bulldogs. While they still had a very, very competitive side, they were struggling to carry on running, and then eventually they had to fold. But now they don't ride at Reading anymore. They have to ride at Swindon in the Junior Development League, and they look to bring young riders through on their journey into the sport. I've been told that they're looking to build a team in the National League, the third tier of British Speedway, and try and get back to where they want to be. So I think that's a really good example of if Speedway's a dying sport, and then this resurrection here, although it's in the early stages, it does show signs that maybe things are picking up in British Speedway. Section 3 then focuses of the story of the young Reading racer Sam Norris. He's the rider that I focused on. This is him here. He's 15 years old, riding for Mildenhall this season as a reserve in the National League. So I met up with him at the Mildenhall Stadium for a press and practice day in April. Interviewed him there, got to know a little bit about him, sort of the struggles that maybe young riders face getting into the sport, mainly funding, having to get around the country, getting time off school, that sort of thing. And then I met up with him again at the Abbey Stadium, Swindon, where Reading now ride, their Junior Development League meetings, and filmed him racing there. And that's sort of the final section of my documentary, is him competitively racing, and him, fortunately for me, getting it on camera, his first win. Then section 4, the last section, is a very brief summary answering the main question: is Speedway a dying sport? And I talk about perhaps that, say maybe 5-7 years ago, Speedway was really being talked about as having no future in Britain, and no future at all. It's massive in Poland, but the funding still isn't there. But then I go on to talk about the British national team, which came second in the World Cup last year and have got through to the finals, which are yet to be raced. And talk about that perhaps now British Speedway is on the incline, and it's going to have maybe as bright a future as it did have, if not more. So the rationale of my piece, I've enhanced my skills. That's basically the underlying message, is from the start of the year, when editing I now feel is one of my strongest points. From the start of the year, didn't know how to edit, didn't know how to use, say, Premiere Pro. But now I feel like it's the strongest one, and I feel that I can use in this documentary, that I can use it to my advantage to make a really aesthetically pleasing piece. And then the second skill that I feel I've enhanced well is my presenting. Again, didn't have much practice or much of a knowledge of presenting, but I feel that now, over the past 6-7 units, I've got more of a chance to practice that, and I feel that I'm getting better to it, and I'm looking forward to doing it more in the future, and I feel that I did narrate quite well in my piece. So the target audience and client. So I've got quite a broad target audience, just over 13s really. Because Speedway isn't as well known as it used to be, I feel that my documentary needs to reach out to as many people as possible. The only reason I've set the minimum age limit at 13 is just because I talk about Reading races a lot, and I think 13 is sort of the very youngest you'd have to be to recall them racing. But again, anyone younger than that, if they're a Speedway fan, then I've tried to make it to appeal to everybody, no matter their knowledge or age of the sport. Raindance Film Festival, that's my client. That runs from the 25th to the 6th of October. I chose Raindance because they show a lot of students' documentaries and short films. They've got lots of different categories, which means that their critics and judges that they have there come from all sorts of backgrounds. So for having a broad target audience, I thought it would be good to have broad people watching it, a wide variety of people watching it, to reach out to the maximum amount of people and try and get my piece some publicity and hopefully win the competition. I'd now like to show you just the opening 5 minutes of my piece, just to sort of show you what sort of thing it entails.
For me to win here is just amazing. It's the best season I've been.
Just gives you goosebumps. It's such an amazing feeling. I want to break the six-time world champion record, and I will do it 6 times.
I think Speedway gives you more adrenaline when you're going into those corners and you've got a fence just about from me to that door, and you're just like, oh, that fence is right near me.
The 12 is in, and the Bulldogs are away from the start, and that man in the yellow helmet, Mark Levin, is there, and Jäger's Conte is there, and now this would be a 5-1, but time is running out for the tactical rule. You do get the feeling that, well, second is there any way back for Peterborough? They're entering last chance saloon, because they're going to have to use the tactical ride, but in the next race, Greg Hancock is there, so he to number 12, and Ring, the fans are going wild on the back straight, and the yellow helmet Mark Levin is there, with Jäger's Conte. They know that it's looking good for the Reading Bulldogs, this magnificent club, who used to race.
What used to be widely known as a national sport is now described as the dying last few remains of a high-octane, adrenaline-fueled speed fest. But is that true? In order to find out, we have to go back to the beginning of the young sport. Speedway was invented in around 1905, and it is believed that the first ever Speedway meeting took place at the Newcastle NSW Rugby Ground. But it was in the early 1950s when Speedway really took off in England. 80,000 people would flock to the Wembley Stadium every year to watch the Speedway World Championships, where legends such as Ivan Major, Barry Briggs and Ollie Olsen would grace the track to compete in the biggest motorcycle event of the year, and Speedway kept getting bigger. With over 50 teams racing, holding 27 World Championships and a further 23 Grand Prix, then what sent the sport into such a disarray? Many people believe that the massive popularity of football heavily affected the sport.
Final, indeed nothing Wembley ever staged matched the glamour of this event, the final of the World Cup.
The cream of the world's players battle for the honour of playing on this.
Whilst others think the unpredictable English weather meant that people were getting fed up with suspended meetings. But in order to properly understand the decline of the sport, we're going to look at Reading Race's decline and resurrection. Founded in 1968, the Reading Racers rode at the Tilehurst Stadium, which is now a retail park. And after 5 years, the club won its first of 4 British League championships, with Swedish legend Anders Michenek topping the rider averages for that year. In the same year, the Tilehurst Stadium closed down, forcing Reading to cease racing for 2 years while the new Smallmead Stadium was being built off the A33, a stone's throw away from the Majeski Football Stadium. Eventually, Reading moved into Smallmead and continued racing in 1975, where they had an average of 6,500 spectators for each meeting. The club won a second British League title in 1980 and regularly had spectators of 7,000 plus. In the mid-80s, the club had little success, despite having a very good team. The next British League title came in 1990 with world champion Per Jonsson leading the team, and in 1994, Jonsson suffered a bad crash while riding in Poland that ended his career and put him in a wheelchair for the rest of his life. After the loss of Jonsson, the team suffered a poor seasons in 1995 and 1996, where crowds dropped and so did media attention. The Racers found themselves in a relegation battle in 1997 as they fought to stay in the newly formed Premier League, the second tier of British Speedway. This, however, brought some much needed success as the team won the league in the same year, and the next year the Racers won the League Cup. For the next 4-year stretch until 2003, the club saw a changeover of promoter, which meant that the club won nothing. However, 2004 saw a turning point for the club when Racers secured a large sponsorship deal, allowing them to sign the Slovenian prodigy Mati Zegar, who still rides in the Grand Prix today. Sadly, the club never reached the heights that it should have done, despite having a very competitive team, and in 2005 it looked as if the club would struggle to survive. The promotion team had to sell the club to BSI Speedway in 2006, where the new investors took the newly named Reading Bulldogs to the Elite League, the top tier of British Speedway. In their first season, the club narrowly missed out on the league title when the Peterborough Panthers beat them by 1 point. However, off-track, the Bulldogs massively struggled, having an average of 650 spectators short of the 2,000 that they needed to break even. This was despite having one of the best teams in the league, with 4-time world champion Greg Hancock, Australian under-16 and under-21 champion Travis McGowan, previously mentioned Mati Zegar, Danish under-21 champion and 3-time Grand Prix rider Charlie Jada, Czech under-21 champion Zdenek Sam Simota, current GP rider and Polish champion Janusz Kolodze, and British prodigy Danny Bird. In 2007, some meetings were being watched by less than 900 fans, which led to BSI having to sell the club to new promoters who agreed to stay in the Elite League for the rest of the season. In 2000... Okay, I'm just going to stop it there. So that's sort of the opening 5 minutes of my documentary. From there I go on to talk about Sam Norris and look at the future of the sport. But moving on to the platform that I uploaded to, I chose to upload it to YouTube. Why YouTube? YouTube has got many pros. It's the largest streaming website on the internet. It's easy and accessible to use, and it's got over 1 billion users worldwide. Looking at my platform research, many people now are turning to YouTube to watch not just documentaries but sports and sports related clips. I think there's been an 80% increase in the last 2 years. So I feel that this would really be suited to my documentary, to try and get as much publicity as possible, not just for my documentary but hopefully the sport as well. Looking at YouTube in general, the only negative thing is perhaps the comments and the dislike section. But the comments I haven't had many, but all the comments I have been positive so far, and I've got more likes than dislikes. So, research. When I started researching, I started with the medium, and sending out surveys, I discovered that the ideal length for a documentary for my target audience would be between 15 to 20 minutes. So that was sort of the target that I was trying to set. I went a bit over on that, but I feel that it was necessary to include everything that I wanted to include. So I looked at different styles of documentary, what sort of style I could use for mine. So I looked at expository, impressionistic, observational, reflexive, participatory and experimental. After sending out surveys and doing some more research on these, I found that expository would be the best style of documentary to use for mine, just because I can include interviews, a lot more archive footage and B-roll to make it not only aesthetically pleasing but also appeal to a wider variety of people. So genre, I looked at codes and conventions of an expository documentary and looked into that in detail further. So I looked at graphics, B-roll, archive footage, diegetic and non-diegetic sound, interviews, infographics, vox pops, and a variety of shots and angles that I can use. And to do that, I analysed and looked at Blue Planet 2 and Louis Theroux's Altered States, two documentaries from two of Britain's finest documentary makers. And I found similarities between them, but also some differences that I'd like to incorporate into my own. For example, Blue Planet with David Attenborough, having like the voice of God and having that narration style is something that I really wanted to try and use. And using Louis Theroux's Altered States, his interview style and his interview technique, the sort of questions that he asked really appealed to me and was something that I'd like to use. Content research, I looked at Speedway in general, the leagues across, how it's dipped in television ratings, the amount of people going to watch meetings, its popularity in Britain, but also how still popular it is in, say, Poland, Sweden and Denmark. Grass track racing, which is something that Sam talks about in his interviews. It's very similar to Speedway, just used on grass instead of shale, the dirt-like substance that's used for Speedway. And it's a platform that most people use to try and get into Speedway. Looked at the Reading races in detail, just because that's the topic of my documentary for the most part. Mildenhall Fen Tigers, where Sam's racing now, and where I went to go and film there. I thought it was important to look at that and understand the history behind it so I could find out more about Sam and perhaps get him to, so I could ask some more questions, perhaps find some interesting answers. Looked at Sam Norris in general, what he's been doing in the past, how he got into the sport, looking at what he's doing, looking at what he's trying to do in the future, and finally how people got into how people do get into Speedway, whether it be through academies, how well they're funded, how well they can get around the country to go and race, and internationally if necessary. So just to finish off, evaluation. While I am completing this, I sent out surveys to try and get up-to-date feedback on how well I'm doing, if my research is all up to scratch, if say I was editing, how like the first draft of my edit would be looking. I'd be getting peer feedback, again through surveys and through talking to people, teacher feedback, whether that be through marking my work and emailing me, or speaking face to face and finding out what I can do best. And weekly blogs, I felt weekly blogs would be really important because it'd be so I could stay on track with my work, work out what I've been doing for that week. And I think that when I come to write my final evaluation, it really did help because I was able to stay on top of it and look back through my weekly blogs, work out what I did that week and what I can incorporate into there and how it helped me. That's it, thank you. Any questions?
Did the project change much throughout the process of going through it?
It changed quite early on, not dramatically. I think the biggest issue I had was instead of filming at Mildenhall, I was meant to be filming at practice day at Rye House. That got cancelled because Sam had a grass track meeting on, so I rearranged to go to Mildenhall, but I ended up doing a lot of research on Rye House, which wasn't all put to waste because there was some that I could still transfer talking about British Speedway, but that changed because I have a short section in there, very briefly talking about Mildenhall, but that originally would have been Rye House.
But from your original idea to the end product, were there many changes, or did it work out pretty much how you imagined it?
It worked out pretty much. I didn't plan on going into Reading races in as much detail, but I felt that as I was researching, actually it'd be really good to run alongside that parallel and also almost use Reading races as a case study to try and give like a personal story. It's something that's close to me. I used to go and watch them. So to give like more of a personal story about the decline of the sport.
Okay. Cool. Well done.